9 years standing as the man who will act as Richard Nixon's liaison with the Johnson administration. His role was outlined by Mr. Nixon himself.
Ladies and gentlemen, remember at the White House the other day I indicated that this nation could speak with only one voice, and that I wanted to make it clear to all foreign nations that any decisions that were made by or any negotiations that were being undertaken by the present negotiation by the present administration would be honored by the next administration. In order to make this a viable arrangement, it is of course necessary that there be the prior consultation on such policy decisions, and that the President-elect not only be informed, but that he be consulted, and that he agree to the course of action. And Ambassador Murphy will be my representative in conducting those discussions at the State Department level and at the administration level.
Mr. Nixon was asked whether, in effect, he had been given veto power over President Johnson's foreign policy decisions. He rejected that notion immediately and then said this.
I don't think this country now can afford, I don't think the cause of world peace can afford a period of 60 days in which everybody is waiting for the next president. And I'm simply trying to set up a procedure whereby the parties on the other side cannot have and will not have an excuse that they must wait for the next president before dealing with matters on which progress could be made by the present president. Okay.
It's hard to imagine what else President Johnson and Richard Nixon could do to demonstrate any more forcefully than they have already a show of national unity. Technically, this period between Election Day and Inauguration Day is a time of transition, with all the weaknesses that are implied. The incumbent president is a lame duck. The president-elect has no constitutional power at all. But Mr. Johnson and Mr. Nixon have transcended that weakness with an act of cooperation that appears unprecedented in American history. In the field of foreign affairs, but particularly in regard to Vietnam, the Middle East, and NATO, it almost amounts to a dual presidency. Ambassador Murphy, representing Mr. Nixon, will literally be sitting at the side of Secretary Rusk in the State Department. The decisions affecting the international posture of the United States will still be made by the Johnson administration, but they will be made in concert with and approved by the president-elect. There is every reason to suspect that not only Vietnam, but the danger of an impending crisis in the Middle East are responsible for this high level of statesmanship. But whatever the reasons, this joint action serves not only the best interests of the nation, but the interests of President Johnson and the president-elect. Frank?
Ted, you and I were talking about this arrangement this afternoon. I agree it seems to be the only sensible one for both the president and the president-elect. For Mr. Johnson, it means that he can continue to make and carry out foreign policy in the next 60 days without any loss of power and influence in international affairs, merely because he is leaving office. I know that George Christian, the White House news secretary, said this afternoon that nothing is in this arrangement to dilute in any way the authority of the president.
Well, Frank, as far as Mr. Nixon is concerned, this really gives him a hand in determining his own destiny. When he takes office, he'll still be faced with all the same foreign policy problems, Vietnam, the Middle East, Eastern Europe. But for what may be the first time in American history, a president-elect is being offered a chance not only to influence the foreign policies of this administration and then his own administration, but is being offered an opportunity to help shape the policies that he will inherit come this January.
Thank you, Ted. Next, we'll have a report on America's most pressing foreign policy problem, the impasse in the Paris peace talks.
At the Hambletonian Beauty Spa, one of the most exclusive beauty spas in the country, some of the most celebrated women in the world pay over $500 a week to be basted in strawberry cream. Molded, rolled, and whipped into shape. They get the most personalized beauty care in the world. But to soften hands at the Hambletonian, they use Jergens lotion. The same Jergens lotion you can buy. Because nothing at any price can soften hands like Jergens. Maybe that's why more women soften their hands with Jergens than the next 6 lotions put together. And now the soft one has added even more softeners. Now there's a soap with enough softness to wear the name Jergens. If you like Jergens lotion, you'll love Jergens Lotion Mild Soap at a very mild price.
North Vietnam today rejected the charges by the United States that Hanoi is abusing the demilitarized zone by attacks on Allied bases and planes. A North Vietnamese source in Paris was quoted as saying, "These accusations are a total fabrication. There has been no violation on our part of any agreement in spite of charges made in Washington." The North Vietnamese also pressured the United States again today to clarify Defense Secretary Clifford's statement on Tuesday. Clifford indicated then the United States may have to go it alone in the peace talks if Saigon continues its boycott. Hanoi wants to know if this means the American delegation would talk to both the North Vietnamese and the National Liberation Front. There has been no official U.S. reply. Despite this diplomatic squeeze on South Vietnam, Saigon continues to play its war of nerves with the United States. ABC's John Rolfson, at the scene of the peace talks in Paris, offers this possible explanation.
Another conference day has passed with no negotiations here in the old Majestic Hotel. And now the South Vietnamese have dug in to hold out a long time more, despite pressures on them from friends and enemies. And as for the warning that the United States might negotiate without Saigon, the South Vietnamese ambassador replied his government will not yield to any pressures. And he made clear what Saigon is waiting for Mr. Nixon to become president.
Mr. Ambassador, do you feel that a Nixon administration will be better for you than the Johnson administration?
We are not speculating on American internal politics, but we hope that the Nixon administration will take necessary time to achieve a genuine and lasting peace.
Do you feel there's danger of a bad settlement because the Johnson administration has not much time left?
We think that 2 months are not enough to reach the kind of settlement we hope for.
Afraid their vital interests will be sacrificed in America's rush to negotiate, the South Vietnamese are now prepared to hold out against all pressures until the American presidency has changed hands. John Rolfson, ABC News, Paris.
And it is, of course, precisely to disabuse them of the idea that there will be a substantive change in policy that Mr. Nixon and Mr. Johnson have announced their accord. In Washington today, a State Department spokesman said there is continuing hope that South Vietnam will join the talks. No decision has been made to go forward without them. Secretary of State Rusk suggested today that any future Russian military move in Europe, similar to their invasion of Czechoslovakia, be met with a response he described as modest enough to show restraint, yet vigorous enough to demonstrate concern. Rusk and Defense Secretary Clifford assured members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, meeting in Brussels, that the United States will continue to support NATO, but they said the other members must make a greater effort in their own defense. Clifford told the NATO gathering that the United States holds a lead over Russia of almost 4-1 in the supply of nuclear warheads ready for firing. At another NATO session, a nuclear defense committee accepted a United States report proposing the use of what it calls demonstrative nuclear explosions to warn aggressors. Under this proposal, NATO forces could explode a nuclear device on their own territory to warn aggressors that the West is ready to use nuclear weapons against them. A big battle near the Cambodian border. That story in a moment.
This is a molecular model of poly-1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate. How about that? And I'm Joanna Barnes here to tell you what this unique molecule of Codel polyester fiber means in carpets. It's so special, it's patented. Every room in your house comes alive because carpets of Codel bounce back beautifully. Even a house full of kids can't keep Codel fiber down. That's why Codel is the fastest growing carpet fiber. If you can't remember the name Codel, ask for poly-1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate.
We also make 2,2,4-trimethyl 1,3-pentane diol monoisobutyrate.
But that doesn't go in carpets.
Codell Fiber has bounced back. Built-in.
Count on Codell, a member of the Eastman Kodak family.
Just before dawn today in Vietnam, about 1,000 North Vietnamese troops attacked an Allied camp near the Cambodian border, 60 miles north of Saigon. As the enemy charged to the barbed wire defenses of the camp, American planes and helicopters dropped flares and then strafed and bombed the enemy force. Artillery inside the camp fired at point-blank range into the enemy ranks. American commanders reported about 300 North Vietnamese soldiers dead after the battle. 4 South Vietnamese were killed. No American casualties were reported. Allied intelligence officers believe there are about 20,000 North Vietnamese troops in that border area. In Vietnam, knowing the size of enemy forces and their locations calls for a certain kind of specialist. ABC's Don Baker has details on one special group from Nha Trang.
Here at Nha Trang on South Vietnam's central coast, reconnaissance men from all the Free World forces are sent to attend the Special Forces Recondo School. Some 40% of the men who start the course fail to finish for one reason or another. Most of the reconnaissance men will find they'll be going to work by helicopter. Recondo teams have to get out of the chopper when it's still in the air. This is where they learn to do it. These students are learning to rappel. They climb to the top of a 50-foot tower on a swaying rope ladder, then slide to the ground on a rope. 50 feet is a long way when you look down from the top. But 125 feet from a helicopter door makes the tower seem like child's play. Students are given familiarization lessons of weapons. The standard weapon of the Recondo is the Car-15, a shortened version of the M16 rifle.
Front silhouette. Take paddle.
In the 90-degree heat of a South Vietnamese beach, it's no hardship to learn how to launch and paddle a rubber boat. Finally, the Recondo training comes to this: a reconnaissance patrol in a suspected enemy area. 2 6-man teams approach Hantre Island. Behind this rocky beach, there are Viet Cong. The training has a grim reality. This first patrol was easy. A lot of walking, but no contact. But that's really the purpose of long-range reconnaissance. If the team makes contact, the mission has failed. The enemy is warned. These men are ready to return to their units now. They'll return to one of the most dangerous jobs in a combat zone, searching for the enemy quietly, almost invisibly if possible. This is Don Baker, ABC News, Nha Trang.
In the first full week of combat in Vietnam, since the bombing halt, 166 American soldiers were killed. That's the highest total in 4 weeks. It covers the week that ended last Saturday. 1,253 U.S. troops were wounded, 200 South Vietnamese soldiers were killed, and Allied sources estimate that 1,431 enemy troops were killed. America's bishops debate birth control. That story in a moment.
Still scrubbing, huh? Just like a scrub woman.
Scrubbing's the only way to clean a bathroom.
Dow Bathroom Cleaner does away with scrubbing, lifts the dirt off, doesn't scratch, leaves no grit.
Oh, yeah?
Here, spray Dow on the tile. See how Dow foam digs under dirt and lifts dirt off like no scouring cleanser ever could. Dow lets you clean like a lady.
Yeah.
Why do you use wax paper? Now there's Handy Wrap at about the same price.
Freshness is a snap with Handy Wrap.
Look, cheese stored a week in wax paper, tough, dry. Cheese stored a week in Handy Wrap, tender, moist.
It keeps food fresher and tasting nice.
And like wax paper, it's
low in price. Why do you use wax paper? Now there's Handy Wrap.
Freshness is a snap with Handy Wrap. Handy Wrap.
The Roman Catholic bishops of the United States have been meeting in Washington all this week to discuss and apparently to debate the contents of a pastoral letter dealing with birth control. The bishops have held no public sessions, but there are some indications of what their final decision will be. ABC's Sam Donaldson reports from Washington.
The Catholic bishops of America hope to say something definitive about birth control, and to that end they've been meeting all week, sometimes staying up almost all night. But with the conference scheduled to end at noon tomorrow, there are indications they will wind up saying something deliberately ambiguous. For 3 days now, a special committee has worked on drafting a pastoral letter that includes a discussion of birth control. Conservative bishops want the letter to support the Pope's ban on artificial methods of contraception. And most importantly, they wanted to instruct all Catholics to obey the Pope without question. Liberals argue for the right of the individual to dissent on the grounds of conscience. And reliable sources say the first language discussed was highly favorable to the liberals. But as the days have dragged on, conservative bishops, and that includes most of the highest-ranking bishops, have whittled away at the right of conscience. A final vote on the pastoral letter is scheduled for tomorrow. Until then, the bishops, increasingly sensitive to press discussion of their obvious division, have imposed a total blackout on the deliberations. But the best guess is that the final wording, while strongly supporting the Pope, may be just deliberately vague enough so that liberals can claim the door has not been completely shut on their position. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, Washington.
In Detroit today, the governing council of the American Public Health Association called for what it termed safe and legal abortions for any woman who wants one. A resolution approved by the council said that access to abortion is an important means of securing the right to spacing and choosing the number of children wanted. Angry parents protest the New York City teachers' strike. That story in a moment.
Oh, boy. It'll take half our weekend just to get started.
Hey, Raleigh Filters. Since when?
Since yesterday. I tried Raleigh's and I like the taste. And the coupons are a good idea.
Hey, that is a good taste. Better than what I have been smoking.
I think you found a cigarette for me.
Is that ours?
I borrowed it from Martha. She got it with Raleigh coupons.
Come to Raleigh Filters. Come to good taste. And remember, the famous Raleigh coupon also comes on light menthol Bel Air.
Bel Air tastes light 'cause the menthol's right. Bel Air tastes light 'cause the menthol's right. Just the right touch of menthol with the white filter too.
You get a special kind of lightness when you smoke Bel Air. Special because the menthol's right.
New York City's public schools have been closed almost all of this term, since September, by a teacher's strike. And there are really no signs that an end to that strike is near. More than 1 million pupils have been kept from class by the walkout. Most have been in school only 11 days since September. Well, today, an angry group of parents, organized into what they call the Citywide Parents Action Committee, took action. ABC's Jim Burns reports.
Fifth Avenue, one of the most famous streets in the world, became a kind of battleground in the 35-day New York City school strike. Over 1,000 angry parents marched on Governor Rockefeller's Manhattan offices, demanding a special session of the state legislature to settle the school crisis. The protesters created a huge traffic jam when they swarmed onto Fifth Avenue at noon. A small detail of foot patrolmen fought to drive a wedge through the crowd and clear a path for cars. Several persons were pushed or fell to the pavement. But the determined demonstrators forced the officers to fall back and regroup. During a lull in the shoving match, we talked to one of the protesters.
I am Dottie Allen. I am of Bayside, Queens. I am a parent. I want my children back in school. I do not want Lindsay playing with the lives of our children.
I want the state legislature, and I want it done now. I am fed up and I'm disgusted.
Frustrated in their efforts to clear the famed avenue with foot patrolmen, officials called in a squadron of mounted police. The horsemen moved into the crowd and with a series of disciplined maneuvers herded everyone onto sidewalks or down side streets. But the parents vowed there'd be more of the same unless the strike was settled.
We have exhausted every avenue. The typewriters have burned. The telegrams have burned. We have no other avenue. This is it.
By mid-afternoon, traffic moved freely again on Fifth Avenue, but the school strike talks remained stalled. The outlook for a settlement grim. Jim Burns, ABC News, New York.
There was trouble over schools elsewhere today. In Swan Quarter, North Carolina, police arrested about 40 Negroes demonstrating against the school desegregation plan being put into effect there. At Colorado State University, 15 students were arrested after they occupied a building in protest against the presence of Dow Chemical Company recruiters on campus. Dow manufactures napalm. At the University of Connecticut, students briefly occupied a building in a demand for amnesty for other students facing discipline for an earlier demonstration against the Dow Company. The Pentagon announced today that servicemen slated for discharge from active duty by the middle of January will be released ahead of time so that they can get home for Christmas. Most servicemen, except those serving in Vietnam or elsewhere in Southeast Asia, will get holiday leave either for Christmas or New Year's. There are about 3.5 million Americans in uniform, of whom about 600,000, of course, are in Southeast Asia. On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were down more than 3.5 points. Nearly 15 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange Index was up 5 cents. On the American Stock Exchange, more than 7 million shares were traded. The American Stock Exchange Index was up 10 cents. Next, a conversation with the wife of a serviceman.
It's a great program for Nashville students on TV8. Enjoy High School Quiz every Sunday at 1:30. This week, Wayne Puckett asks Nina Ottinger, Clark Collins, Frank Harrell, and Randy Stewart questions on art, music, and world events. Trying to get more right answers are Mark Dumday, Dale Oaks, Ray Topping, and Frank Abbott. The thinking gets intense as the teams put their heads together to come up with the correct answer. The answer that wins them honors and valuable prizes. It's inter-school rivalry on a different gridiron, the field of knowledge. The temperature rises when student teams from Two Rivers meet the scholars from David Lipscomb High. Watch Nashville's Battle of the Brains Sunday at 1:30 on TV8's High School Quiz. Come see them on TV8, where we're proud to have pleased you.
Mrs. Patrick Nugent and her son, Lyndon Patrick Nugent, are in Hawaii tonight, awaiting the arrival next week of Airman First Class Nugent, who has been in Vietnam for 7 months but is now due for 5 days' leave. Though Mrs. Nugent is the president's daughter, her methods for keeping in touch with her husband are really no different from those followed by most other wives whose husbands are in the war zone. In Austin, Texas recently, Lucy Nugent spoke with ABC White House correspondent Bill Gill.
Lucy, you're building a unique pictorial diary for the future and for now to exchange with Pat Nugent, your husband in Vietnam. What does it consist of?
Well, it consists primarily of slides, but I'm also taking moving pictures. I took them on our recent Central American trip, and I also do audio tapes that I send, about 3 times a week intermittently with letters of what my day has consisted of. And in other words, I try to keep him informed as if he was here of everything I do from the time I wake to the time I go to bed.
What's some of the most interesting things to Pat that you can keep him abreast of, I should imagine, is little Lynn as he grows up? We have some of the slides you've taken here. Could you tell us what these events were?
Well, this is a slide of Lynn on July the 4th, and here he is out in front of some friend's house, and we had a flag, and he's dressed in red, white, and blue, and of course, he doesn't know what his father's doing, but I'm sure his father would please to see him so patriotic.
This is a familiar gentleman he's with here.
Yes, sir. This is a picture of him with his grandfather and their favorite pastime, the telephone. And I'm sure you'll be able to tell there's no ham in my son, none whatsoever. He really does love to have his picture taken, and a lot of my friends tease me about Lynn. They say, what's going to happen when a year from now Pat comes home and all of a sudden Lynn discovers that the world is not a bunch of flashes, because, of course, so many of my pictures are indoors with bulbs.
You will also receive in this exchange with Vietnam and Pat in his station over there, news that keeps you abreast of what he's doing. We have some of those shots of Pat. Would you explain them to us?
Yes, sir. Of course, he's not able to take as many as I do. He has a few better things to do with his time. But here he is at Cameron Bay, where he was first stationed, outside of his barracks. And in the background, you can see the sand that he said extended for miles and miles, what seemed to be eternity to him at that point. And here he is with a soldier, and he is at a Special Forces camp, I believe, right there, in one of his missions. And there he is with Chuck outside of Da Nang. And Pat was very excited about this opportunity. He was able to get a day when he could go to Da Nang and see my brother-in-law, Chuck, and of course they were able to talk about the common interests they have both in Vietnam and in their families.
And Mrs. Nugent will see her husband next week in Hawaii. That's tonight's news and comment. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.
Hello. I'm Eve, and I live here in the Garden of Eden, and it's really paradise. A lot of these juicy apples hanging around. Did you know that apples make you wise? And an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Anyway, Ocean Spray took a lot of these juicy apples and they stuffed them into this bottle, and they threw in a few little red cranberries, and they shook the stuff up, and they call it Ocean Spray cranapple juice. Oh, wow. It's great. I know that the cranberries give it a great tang, but really it's largely apple juice. So I don't understand why Ocean Spray calls it cranapple. Like, I think that it should be called apple cran. Right? Ocean Spray ought to wise up.
Monday through Friday, in color, the ABC Evening News with Frank Reynolds.
Thank you, Nashville, for making Journey to the Unknown your favorite Thursday night show. David Hedison guest stars tonight at 8:30 on TV 8.
This has been a presentation of ABC News.